Did you notice that this show doesn't have any commercials? I'm not selling you diapers or vitamins or smoothies or gasoline. That's because I don't want corporate sponsors telling us what to investigate and what to say. Instead, you're our sponsors. This is a production by our nonprofit, the Informed Consent Action Network. If you want more investigations, more hard-hitting news, if you want the truth, go to ICanDecide.org and donate now. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are out there in the world. It is time to step out onto the high wire. Well, welcome back. Our whole staff actually got a much needed week off to celebrate Thanksgiving. My Thanksgiving was off the hook. As I promised, we had a rager. I had probably over 40 people, their families over at my house for Thanksgiving. Many thought leaders, beautiful people, children running around, hugging and kissing, just like Thanksgiving should be. I hope you enjoyed yours as much as I enjoyed mine. But right before we took that Thanksgiving break, and after the previous show, Facebook finally deleted our page. The High Wire is no longer to be found on Facebook. Your page has been unpublished. And as you know, it was just over a month, almost 2 months ago, I guess, that we lost our YouTube page. The Informed Consent Action Network, which is the nonprofit that makes this educational news program possible, is going to be filing a lawsuit that involves both YouTube and Facebook, dealing with the issue of censorship. And you know, this is something that we already planned for, but there was a lot of mainstream media that got really giddy about the fact that suddenly the High Wire, which isn't even on television, now can't be found on some of the major social media platforms. Here's one of the headlines and articles that wrote about us. This is NBC News. COVID-19 vaccines face a varied and powerful misinformation movement online. This is by Brandy Zadrozny. It says Facebook removed the page for the online anti-vaccination show, The High Wire, this month for violating policies on misinformation that could cause physical harm, the company said. YouTube had removed the show's channel in July after reports that host Bigtree was downplaying the severity of the coronavirus pandemic on his show and suggesting viewers intentionally expose themselves to COVID-19. It goes on to say, according to a post on the Facebook page for Bigtree's nonprofit organization, Informed Consent Action Network, The High Wire had published more than 500 videos that attracted more than 30 million views. The page had 360,500 followers when it was deleted. And lastly, their audience may not know where to go and how to navigate to those platforms, said Colina Coltai, giggling to herself, a postdoctoral scholar at the University of Washington Center for an Informed Public who studies the anti-vaccine movement. Despite the promotion, only a handful of users have followed Cook, of course that's Larry Cook, who's also a part of this article, and Bigtree to those new platforms. That's how they wanted to write about it. They think they've dealt a major blow to the movement and to truth. We've done it. We've stopped the truth from happening. Of course, they want to call it misinformation, but as you and I both know, it's simply misinformation. This is the information they don't want you to see. You know, I think back to the moment that Nazi Germany starts burning the books. I would guess that those are the books you probably wanted to read. And when China starts censoring videos and news online or on television, I would guess that's probably the news or the videos you would like to see. And in this case, today, we are going to celebrate what makes the High Wire different than all of the mainstream media that is clicking their heels and excited that they think they have ended the reign of truth at the High Wire. Now, just to be clear, even though they think you're stupid and you don't know how to find us now that we're not on Facebook, I just want to point out our numbers as they really are just on our website. Take a look at this. you all knew this was coming, and so on our website, before they even took us off of Facebook, 1.5 million views weekly, seen in 100 countries globally, 70 million views and counting. Over, I think, 150,000 views are happening every day on our website, thehighwire.com. And thanks to all of your support, I think you will see that our player and the things that we're doing, we're working on it. We're working through the glitches so that we make this the most amazing and incredible experience we can online. Now, the beauty of being censored, and many of you know that I joke that I eat censorship for breakfast. In fact, censorship is how we advertise the High Wire. It's how I advertise the film Vaxxed, which got me in the middle of this to begin with. And so I'm going to assume, since we've been censored and multiple articles around the country are gloating about it and talking about the High Wire, many of you who still have brains, and every time blood pumps through your brain, you're curious, why would someone be censored? Just like those people in China or Nazi Germany would like to see what's actually being burned. So for those of you that are joining us for the first time, I want to welcome you to an experience that is like none other. Just to be clear, I was a CBS producer on the daytime talk show The Doctors, celebrating the best that science had to offer. For over 6 years, I won an Emmy Award working on that show. We have multiple CBS producers that I brought over to the dream of doing a news program that is not censored by our sponsors. I meant it in that piece at the top of the show. We are not told what to say by Moderna or by Pfizer or AstraZeneca or Exxon or Pampers. You are the ones that make this possible through our nonprofit so that nobody shackles us or tells us what we can and cannot say. The only thing that tries to shackle us is now these social media platforms that have tried to kick us off. So for those of you joining us really quickly, here is all the social media platforms that you can find us on right now. Of course, thehighwire.com, you'll always be here, at Highwire Talk on Twitter, float.app, DLive.tv, Roku, a lot of fun there. And then we had to do previously recorded. It will not be live, but your archives will be on BitChute, Brighteon, Rumble, Gab, and of course, what's that? Parler, right? Of course, Parler. So we're going to keep bobbing and weaving and jumping to every new platform that accepts us. And as they shut us down, just know that you can join us at thehighwire.com. Also, if this is your first time here, please sign up to our newsletter, because here's what's also special about the High Wire. Every single thing I'm going to talk to you about today, and I have got some mind-blowing science. At least it blew my mind yesterday, and we were just getting it all together to the last second to provide it to you. You won't find it anywhere else. But if you want to check our science, if you want to read the actual peer-reviewed studies or articles or videos that we're going to reference in our show, we're doing something that nobody else in the world does. All you have to do is sign up to our newsletter, and every single Monday, that's right, go to thehighwire.com and simply sign up on our newsletter right there. Give us your email. We won't share it with anybody else, but on Monday, after you've joined that newsletter, we will provide you with hyperlinks to every single article, every study, everything that we talk about, so you can read it yourself and come to your own informed conclusion. And by the way, if you think I read it wrong, please write us at info@thehighwire.com for any comments you want to give me about how I've covered this information. Now, we have an amazing show coming up, and a world-renowned scientist is going to be joining us in just a little bit. Someone we've talked about a lot, Dr. Wolfgang Wodarg, is joining us to talk about a really, really important petition about the SARS-CoV-2 or coronavirus vaccine that's about to be unleashed on the world. And after that, there was a huge turnout to an event all weekend long. Josh Coleman and Olivia Mikos for Vias for Vaccine is joining us to talk about the epic statement, global event made around the world with signs on overpasses all over the place. We're going to talk about that. But first, I want to do something. Now, if you're joining us, or those of you that know me, I am not a doctor, okay? I'm a journalist. So what I do is investigate medicine. I've been reading medical journals for almost 15 years now and working on trying to make that understandable to people out there in the television audience. But to be clear, I'm not an MD. I'm just a journalist investigating things that doctors say. I believe my job as a journalist is to always be skeptical. I was trained to never take anyone's word for it. It doesn't matter if it's the President of the United States, like Nixon, or if it's a scientist or an expert. I will hear what the expert has to say and then go and read the studies that they reference. I always say, look, if, say, vaccines or whatever you're talking about is perfectly safe, please provide me with a scientific study that proves that so I can read it myself. So I'm skeptical. I'm also incredibly curious, which is what you're following when you watch The High Wire. I have a brilliant team here in studio, but I also have an international team of scientists and lawyers and specialists that help me work through and figure out answers to the questions that I personally have. I'd like to start out this show today talking about something that woke me up in the middle of the night. And this is not necessarily science, it's sort of like math, and I was pretty good at math. And something became glaringly obvious about how the news is reporting the efficacy of the COVID-19 vaccine that's about to be released to the public. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, and then I finally did. This is something that's bothering me. Let me take you through it. It starts with how the news, I believe, is incorrectly reporting the efficacy of the vaccine. Take a look at this.
Major news in the race for a COVID-19 vaccine. Drug giant Moderna announcing their vaccine trials show that it is nearly 95% effective.
95% effective.
95% effective. Close to 95% efficacy.
95% effective against COVID-19.
94.5% effective at preventing COVID-19.
95% effective at preventing cases of COVID-19.
95% effective.
So I think this is a really strong step forward to where we want to be about getting control of this outbreak.
Okay, I want to explain something that I was even somewhat confused about it. First of all, have you been asking yourself, why is it sometimes they say COVID-19 and other times they say SARS-CoV-2? Well, here's the difference. SARS-CoV-2 is the infection that we spread to each other, that we're asymptomatic carriers or whatever's going on, we sneeze, we spread to each other SARS-CoV-2. COVID-19 is just the symptoms that come from SARS-CoV-2, otherwise known as the disease, right? The part that makes you ill at ease. This is really important for me to explain what's going on here. So when you were watching that news, and they do this on purpose, you were under the impression when they say 95% effective at stopping COVID-19, you think, well, that's it. We can reach herd immunity because it stops the infection, and I can't spread it to anybody else. And you keep hearing all the scientists and pundits saying, we got to get as many people to get this vaccine as fast as we can in order to achieve herd immunity and stop the infection around the world. But here's the problem. They are not telling you that it stops the infection. It is stopping the illness or the symptoms known as COVID-19. You are still, as far as they know, infected with SARS-CoV-2. You can still spread SARS-CoV-2 to anybody you meet on the street. Thereby, when they're rushing you to get a vaccine to begin with, saying we can reach herd immunity, there is nothing in science that proves that that's true. In fact, they are only going to turn you into a asymptomatic carrier. Now, I've been through this before, but let's go over some of the problems that actually exist with the way the trials were done to begin with, at least in my point. Hold on, let me grab a pen. Okay. So here's the graphs. For those of you, we're going to use Moderna as the example. Remember, Moderna has 30,000 participants and Pfizer has 45,000 participants. The news will have you believe that 30,000 people are part of this trial, but it's really not true. The trial is only going to come down to, in this case, about 196 people. It's called the endpoint of the trial. Here's how it worked. One group, 15,000, half of the 30,000, got the vaccine. The other group, 15,000, got the placebo. They're not studying 30,000 people. I told you, I think it was 2 weeks ago, it's like a giant fishing boat. They threw 30,000 fishing lines into the water, but they only caught fish about 196 fish by which they're going to study the fish, or in this case, human beings. Here's how this worked. They simply wanted to find the first 150 or so that got symptoms, otherwise known as got the COVID-19, right? The expression of the virus. And that's what they found. So the study is actually of 196 people. And in this case, those that got vaccinated, 11 of them ended up being infected within this time period. And 185 of the placebo group got infected, that had the symptoms, right? That actually ended up having a cough or sniffles or things like that. That's what they're looking for. Who got symptoms? 11 in the vaccine group, 185 in the placebo group. So here's what they're telling you. It's not 95% effective at stopping the virus. It's simply it works 95% better than the placebo at keeping you from having symptoms, okay? Remember, it's only masking your symptoms. If you don't believe me and you think we can somehow achieve herd immunity with this, listen to what the experts have to say.
These COVID vaccines are preventing clinical disease. We don't know if they prevent transmission.
And that's the primary endpoint of most of the virus, is to prevent clinical disease, to prevent symptomatic disease, not necessarily.
All right, this has been a test of the emergency movement system. Are you going to be able to stand with us even when they try to shut us down? Look, this is probably a technical error on our part. Welcome back. I'm in the middle of something. It's like someone saying, and the fountain of youth, the secret truth is. I know you're hanging on for dear life. We're going to talk about what we've been talking about. I'm talking about this trial, and what I'm telling you is that this does not say 95% effective at stopping your illness or stopping the actual infection. That would lead to herd immunity. This vaccine and these trials cannot do that. All this is doing is blocking your symptoms, turning you into essentially an asymptomatic carrier. If you don't believe me, let's go back to the experts.
These COVID vaccines are preventing clinical disease. We don't know if they prevent transmission.
And that's the primary endpoint of most of the virus, is to prevent clinical disease, to prevent symptomatic disease, not necessarily to prevent infection.
But again, I think people ought to put this in perspective. What we're likely to get is something like the flu vaccine. It's not necessarily going to protect you from infection, and it may not work for everyone.
We do not know yet if these vaccines will prevent asymptomatic infection, and therefore we do not know if these vaccines will prevent virus shedding and therefore have an effect on community transmission. That is something it is not possible to know at this point in time.
Already, if you're joining us for the first time, you see why we've been cut off of the internet and why they don't want you listening to what we're having to say. I'm not telling you these things, they're telling it to you, but no one in mainstream media is really covering it or drilling down. So are we together on this? These trials and this vaccine, both Pfizer and Moderna and AstraZeneca, as they get approved, cannot stop infection. There's no way to prove that they can. Therefore, even if your symptoms go away, all it has done is turned you into an asymptomatic carrier that can spread it to other people, meaning your mask is not going to come off because you got a vaccine, meaning it doesn't matter what they do, you can still spread it. We can't get to herd immunity. This vaccine is useless for that. But here's what's bothering me. What they're telling you it's useful for is it's better at reducing your symptoms so that fewer people will have symptoms if they get the vaccine. And for some of you, I guess that sounds pretty good. I'll go ahead and take the risk of a completely experimental vaccine as long as I know that I have a chance of avoiding getting symptoms myself. Except that all the headlines last week started saying something different. Let's take a look at some of these headlines. Doctors say CDC should warn people the side effects from COVID vaccine shots won't be a walk in the park. And Trump COVID vaccine czar says side effects significantly noticeable in 10 to 15% of recipients of the vaccine. Participants in Moderna's and Pfizer's coronavirus vaccine trials told CNBC in September that they were experiencing high fever, body aches, bad headaches, day-long exhaustion, and other symptoms after receiving the shots. Now, we covered some of these stories. There was an article a few weeks back we talked about. Let's bring that back up. The coronavirus vaccine trial participants report day-long exhaustion, fever, and headaches, but say it's worth it. It went on to say after getting the first shot on August 18th, he said he felt a little under the weather for several days with a low-grade fever. He got his second shot at a clinic on September 15th, 8 hours later. He said he was bedbound with a fever of over 101, shakes, chills, a pounding headache, and shortness of breath. He said the pain in his arm where he received the shot felt like a goose egg on my shoulder. He hardly slept that night, recording that his temperature was higher than 100 degrees for 5 hours. If this proves to work, people are going to have to toughen up, she said. This is another person that got sick. The first dose is no big deal, and then the second dose will definitely put you down for the day for sure. You will need to take a day off after the second dose. Another participant in Pfizer's trial said he was up all night after the first shot from the pain of the injection. The booster injection he received caused more of that same pain in his arm, followed by intense flu-like symptoms that hit him around 1 a.m. He couldn't sleep that night without an electric blanket and shook so hard that it became uncontrollable, and he cracked part of his tooth from chattering them. It hurt to even just lay in the bed sheet, he said, before he decided to see a doctor. Now, we thought that those were isolated incidences, but now Slaoui, who is the vaccine czar, is telling us no. That happened to about 10 to 15% of the trial participants. All right, do you see where I'm going with this? Stay with me. So let's remember, what is this vaccine supposed to do? It's supposed to stop the symptoms. How are they deciding who got symptoms? What were the symptoms they were looking for? Let's look inside the trial, shall we? The Moderna trial describes the symptoms they're looking for to determine whether the placebo group or the vaccine does better, describes it like this. The Moderna protocol is similarly inadequate. The protocol captures, don't worry about that. Let's go to the bullet points. The participant must have experienced at least 2 of the following systemic symptoms: fever over 38 degrees Celsius, chills, myalgia, which is obviously fatigue, headache, sore throat, or new olfactory and taste disorders. So if you have chills and a fever, like was described by those people, or simply fatigue and a headache, that makes you symptomatic in the Moderna trial. Now let's look at Pfizer's description of what symptomatic or COVID-19 positive means. It means you have one of the following symptoms: fever, new or increased cough, new or increased shortness of breath, chills, new or increased muscle pain, new loss of taste or smell, sore throat, diarrhea, vomiting. Can we go back to the article where Slaoui describes where the CNBC, what the participants were describing as their symptoms, just really quickly, so I really button this up? Participants in Moderna and Pfizer's coronavirus vaccine trials told CNBC in September they were experiencing high fever, body aches, bad headaches, day-long exhaustion, and other symptoms after receiving the shots. Many of them described being down for 24 to 48 hours, some as long as a week. Can we agree that the symptoms that are being described in 10 to 15% of the participants is exactly what they describe as the symptoms that they were looking for in this trial? I think we can. A fever and a headache, there you are, you're symptomatic. Now, the first 196 people that had those symptoms, they are what we decided to study. But here is why it's a lie, everybody. They're telling you only 11 people in the vaccine group had those symptoms. But Slaoui is saying no, 10 to 15% did. So that means this is what this should really look like. I've just added 1,500 symptomatic people that got sick because of the shot. because that's what we know. If it's supposed to avoid symptoms, it didn't do that. And so now we have 1,500 people, making this number, 1,511 people that are sick compared to the 185 that were having symptoms in the placebo group. Do you see what this is? If the entire endpoint and purpose of this vaccine was to help you avoid symptoms, it's failed because the placebo actually performs 90% better at avoiding you having symptoms than the vaccine. The vaccine appears to be making more people sick. How did they get away with this? You're probably saying, Del, this can't be possible. I know. It's totally crazy to think about, but let's read the study on how the study looked at when they were going to record symptomatic people. This is beautiful. Here we go. A study to evaluate efficacy, safety, and immunogenicity of mRNA 1273 vaccine in adults aged 18 years and older. Current primary outcome measures. This is the outcome they were looking for. With a first occurrence, we're looking for the first occurrence of COVID-19. Remember, that's the symptoms, the fever, the headache, or chills. The first occurrence of those things starting 14 days after the second dose of mRNA. All right, if you're joining us, you're saying, wow, these guys really get into it. You're right. I'm not letting them get away with it, and hopefully you can stay with me. So here's the point. Here's how they hid 1,500 or maybe even 2,000, if you go with the full 15%, of sick people that were more sick than those that got the placebo. Take a look at this. If we lay out how the trial worked, this is how it works. On day 0, you get your first shot, right? Hold on, let me get a pen here. Day 0, you get your first shot right there. Now, we wait 7 days, 14 days, 21 days, and on the 28th day, you get the booster shot, the second shot, right? Now, when do we actually start counting the people that get sick, that are having symptoms? Nowhere in here, not 1 week after this shot, but actually 14 days. 14 days after the second shot is when the monitoring finally begins. You see the scam here? People get sick as crazy after the first shot, so sick that doctors are concerned they won't even show up for the second shot, but they don't count. Then a ton of people get sick over here right after their second shot. About 1,500 to 2,000 people are sick right in here, but they don't count. They don't count in our trial because we very conveniently don't start counting symptomatic people until 2 weeks after all of this happened. That's the way it goes. That's how they pull off what I would consider is at least misleading or misinformation for all of us. Truth be told, when we really look at this, this right here means that the vaccine, for its endpoint, has completely, come on now, let's go, is a complete and total fail. The vaccine's failed, folks. It doesn't even stop the symptoms better than the placebo. In fact, it caused more symptoms than the placebo group. We're going to get into the risks everyone may be taking in this completely experimental vaccine coming up. But just know it didn't even meet proving its own endpoint, which was the low bar of at least reducing your symptoms. You're better off not getting the vaccine. But before we get into all of that, it's time for the Jackson Report. All right, Jeffrey. It takes a lot of work to be a journalist these days. I mean, to be a real journalist. I mean, we could just take the headlines from those that want to force these products down our throat, including every news agency there is, and supposedly every expert saying, oh, this is the greatest vaccine ever made. But when we really look at the news, there's something else to learn there. Tell us what you found interesting in the news this week, Jeffrey.
Yeah, great to be with you, Del. And piecing through these narratives, there's so many of them, as you said. Let's take a look at some news coming out of Australia that has some people uneasy. Check this out.
Australia's largest airline has a new plan to keep COVID off its flights.
No jab, no fly.
No vaccine, no boarding pass.
It will be non-negotiable.
Qantas says it will ask all its passengers to have the vaccine before takeoff.
The airline's CEO, Alan Joyce, confirmed that all overseas travellers must receive the jab before getting on a plane. The requirement will be non-negotiable and could apply to domestic services in the future.
I'm pretty healthy, so I don't know if I'd want a vaccination.
But the pushback against forcing people to take vaccines could be fierce. Half of Americans say they aren't willing to take an FDA-backed vaccine.
There have been a number of people saying they would boycott Qantas if this was mandatory.
I'm not big on cancel culture, really, Jeffrey Jackson, but in this case, I think cancel on Qantas. And my phone was ringing off the hook. People have really been freaking out. Del, they're going to keep us from flying. And after I've just shown you for a vaccine that won't even stop transmission, the whole idea is Qantas protecting Australia from having infection come into their island. The vaccine doesn't even do that. It shows how absurd this entire moment we find ourselves in is. But,
yeah,
what are the details?
Yeah, the CEO may have jumped the gun on this. He made some pretty big sweeping statements there, as you saw in those headlines. And when asked for comment, Qantas Airlines, they did not get back on how they were going to police this, any kind of details of when it would come into effect, if there would be any exemptions from this. It was more of like an out-front press release statement. But what I thought was interesting was it did grab some headlines, and it did create some headlines that were changed on the fly. We should start a segment called the memory hole, because we catch them changing headlines all the time. And this is no different. So this is out of the Daily Mail. They started out after Qantas made this announcement, they put out a headline that said, "Anti-vaxxers melt down over Qantas plan for mandatory coronavirus vaccine." Now you see it there in a search engine because that's the only place it exists anymore.
Those
because that's the
crazy
first headline.
anti-vaxxers were the only ones that thought this was a problem. They're going to try and stop us from this great life-saving measure of stopping people from getting on a plane. Okay?
Exactly. Now check out what happened. So as it became clear that this started a global pushback and people were calling for boycotts everywhere, perhaps calling them anti-vaxxers wasn't a good idea. So the Daily Mail changed it in midstream to read, which it reads now, "Furious travelers," which is probably more accurate, "vowed to boycott Qantas over plan to ban to passengers who refuse to get immunized as part of sweeping new COVID rules, but others back airlines no jab, no fly." Wow. Now in the article it says, "Furious travelers have vowed to boycott Qantas after the airline revealed passengers who refused to be immunized against coronavirus would be banned from international flights. Sewage testing on planes, monitoring ankle bracelets, and DNA testing are also being considered to keep passengers safe." So it's important to keep these narratives, because as these things go on, if you don't like any of those things, according to the media's knee-jerk reaction, apparently you're an anti-vaxxer. But it's interesting that they would go with that term and then yank it back.
Way. I mean, obviously they don't want more people identifying as anti-vaxxers. I mean, you're probably saying to yourself, I'm just a regular person, but a 2-month safety trial on something that, if you looked at the news the way I did, doesn't even stop transmission and has no safety profile and all sorts of historical problems. I think I'm going to sit back and wait. And now I'm an anti-vaxxer for questioning and wanting good science with double-blind placebos. Obviously, they corrected their course. That's hysterical.
Right. And now this Qantas announcement whipped up a frenzy. So we have the Telegraph talking about vaccine stamps for people in Britain. This is Britons to get vaccine stamps in their passports before overseas travel. So here this narrative just goes and starts running away. But it's going to be reeled back in a second. So let's look at the article. The new vaccine stamps will allow tourists to avoid being held up. So that's the excuse they're using is expediency. Avoid being held up at borders if the international travel industry starts to pick up in the middle of next year as the pandemic subsides. And then a member of the UK Parliament, his name is James Sunderland. Mr. Sunderland told the Telegraph, "Pets need a vaccination passport when traveling between the UK and Europe, and this would be a fantastic way of ensuring freedom of movement of people." So now we're on Animal Farm, I guess.
Now,
If it's good enough
exactly
for your
what I said.
dog,
You're a
it's
farm animal, baby. If you want to like take part in this, you are simply the herd they've been referring to you as. You're not a human being. You don't have rights. You're like an animal that you got to jab, stick it in a box, and put it under the plane. We'd like to be able to treat you the same way. Love it. Wake up,
maybe not the
people. It's
best.
happening.
Maybe not the best analogy, Mr. Sunderland. So, well, this reeled back, and it was called a bit premature. So after this frenzy kind of died down a little bit, you had the CEO of the International Air Transport Association. His name is Alexandre Dejoniac, and this is a trade association. It represents about 82% of all world flights, and he said that the global airline body is distancing itself from Qantas and its vaccine stance. So, like I said, he calls it a bit premature. And what he said about it was, we cannot wait for a vaccine to be deployed. Otherwise, we'll all be dead. Testing is the key priority. The key issues is to remove the travel restrictions. That is the point I think we should focus on. An immediate solution already exists. We could safely open borders today with systematic COVID-19 testing. Now, we're going to get into that later in the show, but he's obviously saying, like, look, we got to back this off a little bit. The vaccine's still, it's still in trials. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like when it rolls out. And now we're basing our whole entire airline industry on this thing. So he's kind of a voice of reason that came in from what I saw.
I think this is important. It's going to be sort of the message we want to give to people today. You got to stop giving the power to, like, they're so powerful. Dell Pharma's so powerful. They own everybody. They own the airlines. They own the government. No, they do not. They're making massive mistakes. They're taking giant overreach that they're having to pull back. As we pointed out before, change their tune over and over again. They look like fools. And who does not look like a fool? The high wire that has been proving everything that we've been saying all along to be true. So stay here, stay with us, so that we can keep you, grounded and recognizing that there is stability ahead, and these mistakes are only making our job easier to point out how dangerous the thinking is and how desperate they actually are. What do you got next?
Well, the Advisory Commission on Immunization Practices met this week, and we've been no stranger to reporting on that on this show. And they met with a lot of agendas on the docket, but one of the major ones everyone was keeping an eye on is they were going to vote on who was going to get the COVID-19 shot first in the United States. So let's take a look at what they talked about.
Reactogenicity post-vaccination will be a concern among vaccinated healthcare personnel. We will have additional data soon from the phase 3 trials. This is the current data from the phase 1-2 trials with vaccine doses used in the phase 3 trials. While the numbers here are quite small, you can see that systemic symptoms are more common after the second dose. Next, consider staggering vaccination of personnel from similar units or positions. In addition, consider planning that personnel could have time away from clinical care if healthcare personnel experience systemic symptoms post-vaccination. And on that issue, we wanted to let you know that there is additional CDC guidance forthcoming describing the approach to systemic symptoms in healthcare personnel after COVID-19 vaccination.
That was actually the wrong video, Jeffrey. I think what we wanted to show was that they decided that there would be, I believe it was frontline doctors, nursing homes, and communities at risk, like African-American communities would be some of the first to receive the vaccine. But what that showed is that the CDC actually has a concern, right, that if we start vaccinating our healthcare workers, what if they all get sick? Remember what I opened the show up with. This is not, this is known news. People are going to get sick. Systemic illness is possible. If we vaccinate everyone in a hospital, what happens if they all get sick and we can't run the hospital? So she's talking about, right, like let's vary when people get it, give half maybe in one department and wait for the others. And meanwhile, doctors are aware of this, right? I mean, I don't think they're stupid. They know this is an extremely experimental vaccine that has now very known, noticeable effects as it's being described. So what's going on with the doctors? Are they going to line up for this?
Yeah, correct. And this is something that was predicted, and now it is a reality. It's the healthcare workers and the residents and workers of long-term care facilities is what's being green lighted. It's called Phase 1A. So the doctors are and the medical professionals are the targets now for this first wave of vaccinations when it gets approved in the U.S. So what's happening is we're seeing a new narrative come out, and much like the Qantas Airlines, people that didn't like that, we're seeing doctors that question the vaccine, are also becoming called anti-vax. This is a headline out of the Sky News. This is the NHS. NHS doctors and nurses and health professionals staff form anti-vax group and label new COVID jabs poison. Well, looking past the headlines, the group they formed was called NHS Workers for Choice, No Restriction for Declining Vaccine. So this was basically some workers that are getting together and saying, look, they might try to coerce this like they have with the flu jab in the past, and we don't want to lose our jobs. So we're going to get together and perhaps discuss the science. They were immediately labeled. Basically, what happened was someone infiltrated the group. It's a closed group now, and it's no longer hundreds. It's up to almost 3,000 people. And they're discussing what they're going to do, what the studies look like, and the data. Now, let's go over to the Washington Post. And this is not an isolated incident here. We have doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals talking. Washington Post, doctors and nurses want more data before championing vaccines to end the pandemic. Looking at the quotes in there, large health system, medical societies, and the federal government are launching an effort to persuade frontline healthcare providers to take novel vaccines that were developed and are likely to be granted emergency approval in record time. So in the US, we're really in the middle of like an Operation Warp Speed of vaccine persuasion. And why is that? Well, there's a lot of studies that show this. For example, this is a study out of, it looked at Los Angeles healthcare workers. It was in a November assessment of COVID-19 vaccine acceptance among healthcare workers in Los Angeles. It found, notably, 47.3% of respondents reported unwillingness to participate in a coronavirus vaccine trial, and most, 66.5%, intend to delay vaccinations. The odds of reporting intent to delay coronavirus vaccine uptake were 4.15 times higher among nurses. And this isn't just a US or a UK phenomenon. Also in Italy,
the irony, by the way, just because you and I cover this, and so many of those parents of vaccine injury out there must just be shaking their head saying, welcome to the club, doctors and nurses, that made us anti-vaxxers and told us we were crazy when we wanted to delay our vaccines after we saw injuries. Yeah, we too want to delay, but the CDC and doctors keep saying, you better not do that. That could be dangerous. Now we have doctors and nurses, I'm going to delay the vaccine. Thank you very much. It's really an ironic moment. And, you know, look, my heart goes out to these doctors and nurses because you're going to have to assume that many of these hospitals around this country probably will mandate this or attempt to mandate this COVID-19 vaccine on their nurses and doctors, just like they do the flu shot and sort of like Qantas is talking about. But I want to make one thing clear before we move on, Jeffrey. For those of you that are watching, this is exactly what our legal team at the Informed Consent Action Network is waiting for. You see, doctors are protected from liability for injecting you with these vaccines. Hospitals are protected. In fact, almost everybody's indemnified, if not by the 1986 Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, an act signed in 1986, which protected all manufacturers and hospitals and doctors from being sued if you're injured by a vaccine. Now we have the PrEP Act, which is the emergency act that preps any type of product that is used in an attempt to deal with this crisis of COVID-19. But here's what we think. There's nothing in the PrEP Act of the 1986 Act that ensures that a private employer, whether it is an airline, your employer, or a hospital, they are not indemnified from forcing you to do something that may injure you. So if someone gets injured because their employer forced this on you, guess who is ready to jump in line and file one of the greatest lawsuits of all times? When you're donating to Informed Consent Action Network, you're donating to the most successful nonprofit legal defense team that is fighting these vaccine mandates everywhere that they land. Of course, we've won lawsuits against the CDC, the FDA, the National Institute of Health, and Health and Human Services. Nobody else can make that claim. So don't worry, folks. We are ready for this little piece of insanity to begin. Go ahead. I dare you. I dare you as an employer to try and forcibly vaccinate your employees. All right, move on. How's the rest of the story going?
Yeah, so in Italy, same thing happening, and this is kind of the narrative that's really coming to the surface for a lot of the doctors. In Italy, the top doc says that he won't take the COVID vaccine today. Now, this was translated out of an Italian paper, and he says, I reiterate that on the basis of the knowledge that we have today, I won't have the vaccine, Crisanti, the director of the University of Padua's microbiology laboratory, told Sky Television. If the data were made public and the scientific community validated it was good, I would have it. I have no doubt about it. It's a question of transparency. If you want to generate trust, you must be transparent. The more scientists complain about the lack of information and the more they demand it, the more people will show trust. Crisanti also said that he doesn't think the COVID-19 vaccination should be obligatory. Now, out of Forbes News, this is something that's interesting. Vaccine safety to remain unclear until millions get their shots. So bringing this back to the narrative here, the doctors and the long-term care facility residents are the fourth phase of this trial. This is called the post-marketing surveillance phase. Make no mistake, though, this is the fourth phase of the trial. So you are trial participants.
You are in an experiment. This is an experimental product. And I think, the irony of this, that when we got kicked off at Facebook, what they're saying is that we spread misinformation that puts people in harm's way. Yet every single network in the world is saying it's 95% effective. Go out and try any one of these. Go ahead. It's the greatest thing you can do. And if you're a doctor, you better take it too, or I'm going to call you an anti-vaxxer. They're literally driving people into an experimental product that has no understanding of its safety. But I'm the one, and you're the one, Jeffrey, that are putting people in harm's way. I don't think so. And guess what? It's probably why we're growing by the millions in our viewership. Outrageous.
Well, it's important not to listen to us. Let's give the last word on this topic to a vaccine safety scientist. She's an infectious disease physician from Uppsala Monitoring Center in Sweden. This is Rebecca Chandler. She took to Twitter to give a pretty interesting message. She said, perhaps watching a scientific community praise and promote vaccines based on press releases rather than review of data may actually promote vaccine skepticism. How about that? So speaking about vaccines, Pfizer approved the UK approved Pfizer's vaccine. This is the first approval in the West of any vaccine. And this was done by the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency.
Here we go.
There's a lot of places there's a lot of places and directions we can go with this story. What's interesting in reading that story is they said that a lot of European regulators were still missing a lot of the data, and they cast doubt on the rigor of Britain's review. And to that point, out of Sweden, this is the Switzerland reporting saying that incomplete data stalls Swiss authorization of COVID-19 vaccines. So Switzerland's medical regulator, Swissmedic, said that they're still missing data on the Pfizer, on all three vaccines. Actually, they're missing the safety, efficacy, and quality data on this to make the decision. So a lot of people are saying, hey, UK, where are you getting this info from? How did you approve this so quickly? And is it only based on certain subsets? Because we don't have the data. But what's happening right now, regardless of that piece, leaving that there, what's happening right now is in the UK, they're rushing to retrofit locations. I've read up to 42, 43 locations. The military is helping do that. And keep in mind, this Pfizer vaccine needs to be kept at negative 70 degrees Celsius. So there's also an
like
incredible
100 below
supply
zero
chain.
Fahrenheit, right?
Right.
Good luck with that, because we have
chain.
100 below freezers everywhere. Not.
Right. Right. So, and you mentioned earlier in the show about legality and logistics about this if injuries happen. So that was answered in a headline just yesterday. This is the legal protection, coronavirus vaccine, Pfizer given protection from legal actions by UK government.
There you go.
This is some incredible quotes in here. The Department of Health and Social Care has confirmed the company has been given an indemnity protecting it from legal action as a result of any problems with the vaccine. Ministers have also changed the law in recent weeks to give new protections to companies such as Pfizer, giving them immunity from being sued by patients in the event of any complications. NHS staff providing the vaccine as well as manufacturers of the drug will also be protected. Here's the kicker on this next quote. In a press conference with journalists on Wednesday, Ben Osborne, Pfizer's UK managing director, refused to explain why the company needed an indemnity. He said, we're not actually disclosing any of the details around any of the aspects of that agreement, and specifically around the liability clauses. So there's your transparency.
Wow.
As far as that's concerned. Now in the
Welcome to Real
U.S.,
News, people. I bet you this is blowing your mind. It's blowing mine because I haven't seen it on Fox, MSNBC, CNBC, CBS, you name it. No one is telling you these things. It's an experiment, and they don't want you to think about how experimental it is. Outrageous.
right. And in the U.S., just to put a cap on this this segment here, we're waiting on December 10th. It's estimated that the Vaccines and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee, sometimes known as VRBPAC, they're going to meet on December 10th, and the FDA is thought to going to be taking some of their recommendations forward when it comes to giving the emergency use for the vaccine here in the U.S., whichever one that may be. So kind of all eyes on that meeting. But really, I think the biggest story here, I've been really excited to report this, is the PCR testing.
Right.
There's been a lot of issues with this. Even Tony Fauci came out and said anything over 35 cycles with this PCR testing is not too accurate.
And we covered this. We did a whole show. We did a whole breakdown of how the cycles work, how the 45 cycles has the ability to be up to 100% false positives. Which is unbelievable that they're using this diagnostic tool this way. We laid it all out, but there's sort of a new breaking story. It's no longer a problem that Highwire is pointing out, is it?
No. And how did we get here? Why are we even using this test? So in January, a German virologist named Christian Drosten, he created a new laboratory assay to detect the coronavirus from the German Center for Infection Research. And he put out, the WHO quickly picked that up, picked up that guideline, and the Euro Surveillance also published that in their journal. It's a infectious disease epidemiology journal, and it's called Detection of 2019 Novel Coronavirus by Real-Time RT-PCR, and that was in January, and that became the standard.
So he's basically the guy that there's always been PCR tests, but he isolated the part that could detect the coronavirus for COVID-19 that could be used in a PCR test and say, hey, we're ready to go, we can start testing everybody.
Yes. Okay. And a lot of people had an issue with that. They took to Twitter. A guy named Walter Akima went on Twitter and really questioned why the heck that thing was rushed so fast. He basically said, of all the publications, no research paper got reviewed and accepted in less than 20 days. One got accepted in less than 24 hours after submission, and that was the Drosten paper. It's come to be known as the Drosten Review. So now, the breaking news on this is this paper is being contested, as is and by extension, so is this new assay PCR test that is being used. And that's the PCR test that's being used really everywhere throughout the world.
This is what's driving the lockdown, right? I just saw, California, you're not allowed out of your house. You can't get in a car. You can't get on a bicycle. You can't do anything because the PCR tests are showing that there's this dramatic increase in cases. We've talked about this. If coronavirus truly is a deadly disease, when cases go up, what should you see? You should be saying deaths go up, ICU going up. Not happening. Deaths are not going up. They're still flatlined. This whole thing is a giant fake out, or at least it appears to me. But let's get back to the PCR tests that are driving the insanity around cases and the case-demic. So continue on.
Yeah, so the PCR is being contested by 22. These are credible health professionals. They've done an external peer review because they're basically stating the first one was not peer reviewed. They sent it to Euro Surveillance editorial board asking for a retraction. What they did was looked at all components of the test design. The protocol recommendations were assessed. They looked at the parameters and they examined those against relevant scientific literature. And now this is a deep dive, so I recommend anybody go into this, but I took some segments from it, and let's just read a couple here just to give you an idea what these tests, some of the issues with this test. So
this is a summary of the errors that there are. So, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, correct. And there's 10 of them. There's 10 major errors in there. I just
Okay.
took a couple out.
Great.
Number 3, the test cannot discriminate between the whole virus and viral fragments. Number 6, the PCR product have not been validated at the molecular level. Number 7,
Whoa.
the PCR test contains neither a unique positive control to evaluate its specificity for SARS-CoV-2 nor a negative control to exclude the presence of other coronaviruses. Number 8, the test design in the Corman-Drozdin paper is so vague and flawed that one can go in dozens of different directions. Nothing is standardized, and there is no standard operating procedure. And number 10, we find severe conflicts of interest for at least 4 authors, in addition to the fact that 2 of the authors of the Corman-Drozdin paper, Christian Drozdin and Chantal Ruskin, are members of the editorial board of Eurosurveillance, which may explain why it was peer-reviewed so quickly or put in that journal so quickly. Now, this is something that's very interesting, and it speaks to the cycling. And this is directly from the paper. We've talked about the cycling. They go right in. This is probably the most concise description I've ever seen. And they say about the cycling, if someone is tested by PCR as positive when a threshold of 35 cycles or higher is used, as is the case in most laboratories in Europe and the US, the probability that said person is actually infected is less than 3%.
Whoa.
The probability that said result is false positive is 97%.
My God. Oh, we're destroying the world with this test, and it's 97% inaccurate. Did you hear that, folks? This is not me. This is not somebody, a reporter out there. This is a pretty large group of scientists involved in this too, right? Authors on this rebuke of the PCR test.
Yeah, there's 22, and these are not run-of-the-mill scientists. These are researchers. These are world-renowned doctors and academics, people that have held positions in pharmaceutical companies such as Pfizer. Now, let's look at the conclusion of this paper. I know it's a long segment, but it's so important. So they say, in light of our re-examination of the test protocol to identify SARS-CoV-2 described in the Corman-Drozdin paper, we have identified concerning errors and inherent fallacies which render the SARS-CoV-2 PCR test useless. If there's a headline, that's it right there. And finally, they say a decision to recognize the errors apparent in the Corman-Drozdin paper has the benefit to greatly minimize human costs and suffering going forward. Is it not in the best interest of Eurosurveillance to retract this paper? Our conclusion is clear. In the face of all the tremendous PCR protocol design flaws and errors described here, we conclude there is not much of a choice left in the framework of scientific integrity and responsibility.
Boom. Wow, Jeffrey, that's gigantic. That's gigantic. We have, and this really is behind this entire pandemic. Without the false positives of this PCR test, none of this story adds up. I mean, I feel like every single week we bring another explosive bombshell. I've got another one coming up in just a few minutes here. Folks, look at this. The scientists are telling you, you are being lied to. They are using the worst diagnostic tool in the history of science, really, to drive a pandemic that does not even appear to be real because it's 97% false positives. Wow, that's huge, Jeffrey. You know,
let's give Christian Drozdin the last word here. That's
please.
A bombshell. It's hard to really report past that, but since he's not here to talk, we'll look at an old interview that resurfaced. This is from 2014, so that's almost 7 years out now. Drozdin considered PCR tests to be unsuitable. Holy moly. So It says, when MERS cases surfaced in Saudi Arabia in 2014, the authorities there decided to use the highly sensitive method of polymerase chain reaction PCR for testing. Drozdin said, quote, "The method is so sensitive that it can detect a single genetic molecule of the virus. If, for example, such a pathogen flits over the nasal mucous membrane of a nurse for a day without becoming ill or noticing symptoms, then it suddenly becomes a MERS case. Where previously terminally ill were reported, now suddenly mild cases in people who are actually very healthy are included in the reporting statistics." And he goes on to say, in addition, Drozdin sharply criticized the media. He considered the pandemic surrounding MERS to be largely media-made. He says, quote, "In addition, the local media boiled the matter up incredibly high. In the region, there is hardly any other topic in the TV news and daily newspapers. And in conclusion, medicine is not free from fashion waves. And that time In that time, the WHO recommended that only those cases be reported as sick where an antibody test was carried out was positive. Drosten agreed with this opinion.
So he knew. He knew that this would drive false positives, it would drive a panic and a narrative, and the media would use it. But this time, instead of being against it, he celebrated it and gave us this crappy, world-renowned pile of steaming you-know-what to drive a pandemic, the worst diagnostic tool maybe we will ever look at when we look at this in our review mirror in history. Amazing reporting, Jeffrey. Very thorough. Thank you so much for all of that work. And, we'll see you next week.
All right. Thanks, Del.
All right. For those of you that like to get more in depth, certainly go ahead and read the Jackson Report. He gets more and more in depth on our website, thehighwire.com. Just go to the Jackson Report and read some of these great articles that discuss these issues. Once again, I don't know. Maybe you don't care about these things. Maybe you just want to stick your head in the sand and say, somebody's going to take care of me. Then the High Wire is not the place for you. Your life is being destroyed. Your job is being destroyed. People are committing suicide. People can't get to a heart doctor. They can't get to their oncologist. They can't get the surgeries they need because of all of these lies. Lies about the effectiveness of a vaccine that's going to be forced on, innocent people in nursing homes that don't know this is experimental. Doctors and nurses that do know it's experimental. And then the PCR test, which is driving this entire thing through the roof, is a total and complete disaster and fraud. You only see this here on the High Wire. This is why they're kicking us off the internet. But we need your help. We want to do more investigations. We want to hire more staff, more reporters, so that we can keep bringing you the most in-depth information around the world. And we have a great opportunity this holiday season to be a part of that. We've talked about it before, but if you haven't had your chance to lay a brick in the foundation of our future on the high road, take a look at what that's all about. Because of the generosity of many of our donors, we have been able to acquire a property of our own. And every Thursday I have to walk from those offices over to where our studio is being put together. That road to the High Wire should be paved with the foundational principles of what we represent. I'm excited to present the most ambitious project we have had to date. To put your love, your heart, your passion, your faith into a place that will be here on this campus forever. We're offering you the opportunity to purchase one brick over the holidays that will be a part of this road, the High Road.
To become part of this exciting project, go to ICanDecide.org and click on Buy a Brick. So you can purchase a brick that you can personalize with a name, an inscription, or maybe even a vaccine-injured loved one in your family.
It's going to take each and every one of us, brick by brick, building the future for our children and the world. I want to thank all of you for all of your support. And look, if you are out there and you need to make a large donation at the end of the year, we're in that time. Please go to ICanDecide.org and make that donation so that we continue to do the work. We will be launching the largest lawsuits the world will see against any attempt to force this vaccine on anybody, and especially those that get injured. We also continue to produce this show, so I want to thank you for all of your support. I want to move on to a very exciting moment here. We've had a lot of guests on, but first let me explain what's going on. There is a petition now to try and stop the vaccine from being released in Europe and stop the trials in their tracks until some serious errors are fixed. The complaints are the dangers, or the potential dangers, if they are not rectified, of this vaccine. Let me very quickly just read through these before I bring on my next guest. Here are the four major elements that are being pointed out by Dr. Woodard and Dr. Yeadon. The formation of so-called non-neutralizing antibodies can lead to an exaggerated immune reaction, especially when the test person is confronted with the real wild virus after vaccination. This so-called antibody-dependent amplification, ADE, has long been known from experiments with corona vaccines in cats, for example. In the course of these studies, all cats that initially tolerated the vaccination well died after catching the wild virus. That's problem number one. Problem number two, the mRNA vaccines from BioNTech and Pfizer contain polyethylene glycol, PEG. 70% of people develop antibodies against this substance. This means that many people can develop allergic, potentially fatal reactions to the vaccination. Number three, the vaccinations are expected to produce antibodies against spike proteins of SARS-CoV-2. However, spike proteins also contain syncytin homologous proteins, which are essential for the formation of the placenta in mammals such as humans. It must be absolutely ruled out that a vaccine against SARS-CoV-2 could trigger an immune reaction against syncytin-1, as otherwise infertility of indefinite duration could result in vaccinated women. And then lastly, the much too short duration of the study does not allow a realistic estimation of the late effects. As in the narcolepsy cases after the swine flu vaccination, millions of healthy people would be exposed to an unacceptable risk if an emergency approval were to be granted and the possibility of observing the late effects of the vaccination were to follow. Nevertheless, BioNTech Pfizer apparently submitted an application for emergency approval on December 1st, 2020. We've just updated you that vaccine has been approved for the UK as we speak. It is my honor and my privilege to finally have on the show someone that we have discussed many, many times. I am joined by Dr. Wolfgang Wodarg. He joins me now, one of the authors on this incredible petition. So to begin with, Dr. Wodarg, thank you for joining us. I want to ask you this. I mean, you have been involved as a public health expert in Germany. This is your area of expertise. We have been pointing out many of these issues on our show. Are you telling me that the trials are not sufficient in proving that they've overcome what could be potentially fatal outcomes in the future?
Yes, there are many failures in these trials to be expected because the trials, they run a very short time. And what is dangerous in vaccine reaction is not only the fever and that it hurts after the jab, but it's also the long-term possibilities of illnesses. There may be chronic illnesses arising, and these are allergic illnesses, or these are also autoimmune diseases, which like multiple sclerosis, like rheumatism, like many immunological defects that happen. So, and to know this and to know how much the body of the vaccinated people is insulted by the vaccination, you need to observe it for several months, even sometimes after some years. And as you already said, there are deficiencies of the immune system arising when you have a second contact with some similar antigen. And then your body may get very excited, more than normally when the contact would happen, so that your immune system makes a cytokine storm, something like this, or has a reaction which is not controllable. And then you get very ill. And the symptoms are manifold because you don't know whether it happens in the nervous system, or whether it happens in the joints, or where in what organ system those processes start. This is
so of course
they do not observe it.
You're talking about this ADE, that's antibody-dependent enhancement. We've talked about this on this show, but just let me sort of lay it out for brand new people that are joining us, and correct me if I'm wrong. Essentially what happened in all the animal trials of a coronavirus vaccine over the last 20 years is that they would inject the animals with the attempt at a vaccine. It looked like it was safe because the animals weren't reacting to it. They checked their blood. It looked like they were producing antibodies, so it looked like the vaccine worked. But essentially, the animal trials go a step further than those trials that are in humans usually, which is a challenge study where they inject the animal with the actual coronavirus. And what happened was shocking. Instead of the antibodies protecting the animals and blocking essentially the virus, it seemed to grab on or somehow draw the virus deep into the cells. It proliferated faster, causing cytokine storms, leading to upper respiratory conditions and sometimes organ failure and even death, as was pointing out in the cat trials. And we saw this, right, Dr. Vodarg, in the dengue vaccine, which was released over a year ago, that killed over 600 people. We thought the vaccine was safe, but then when they came in contact with the virus, the vaccine ends up being like a catalyst to make the virus more dangerous. And of course, an RSV vaccine program back in the 1960s killed babies the same way. My question to you, did I get that? Is that roughly sort of a correct interpretation?
Yes. You have to imagine that our immune system consists of cells that are specialists, and those cells, they communicate with each other, and they are trained. We learn all the stuff which is our own. Our cells don't fight against it, but they distinguish the foreign stuff comes into our body, like vaccine, or like even from flowers, or when you have some dust, inhaling it. The immune system recognizes everything, learns everything, remembers everything. And when you cheat the immune system with something, when you give the immune system a stimulus that makes an alarm, and it's very much alerted, and then something similar comes again, not the same even, but something similar, then there is a very, very big alarm, and this
Hello, everybody. We're back live. I want to apologize. We obviously have some gremlins in the studio today. That's the second time our system has crashed. We'll be looking into that this week to try to make sure this all goes more smoothly as we move forward. But these are obviously the issues in a time where we don't get to use YouTube's players anymore or any of those things that everybody else gets. We're having to build it all ourselves. And sometimes there's some glitches we need to work out. I especially want to apologize to my guest, Dr. Wolfgang Vodarg, who was in the middle of a riveting explanation about antibody-dependent enhancement. You were saying, obviously, that our immune system is designed to recognize foreign invaders from self to not attack self. But when you start stimulating that system sort of artificially or with things, you can start to cause issues. Right about there, why don't you go ahead and continue what you were discussing about that issue?
Yes, thank you. Yes, then the immune system may, if it is irritated in an artificial way, it may be confused, completely confused, and react in a way that we get ill. And if this is chronic ill, we call it an autoimmune disease, or if it's an acute, very, very strong reaction, then we call it cytokine storm or something like that. This is an antibody-dependent enhancement. What happens after the vaccination, for instance, or in dengue fever, when you have two different viruses, dengue viruses coming one after the other after a certain period, you can have it. So if we have this new vaccinations, which will modify us genetically to produce antigen, which is a very new method, which we have not experienced yet in human beings. It has not been tried out in such a big scale, in such a big mass vaccination. And so it's very, very dangerous. And I'm very happy that some doctors who are responsible in Germany for watching all the quality of vaccinations, that they now show up, and they come up and they say, when they were asked by journalists, and it was even published, which is a wonder in Germany, which makes me hope a little bit. It was not that the case in the last month, but it was published. And the director of the institute, which is the Institute for Quality in Medicine, he said that he has not enough data to know and to say something about whether the measurements the government takes, such as wearing masks, distancing, such as lockdown, such as vaccinations, whether they indicate it or not. So he cannot judge on it because he does not have the data. And what is still worse is that the government did not even once ask that person who is normally responsible for it. It's a very big scandal that the government use its own means to control the quality of health measurements. And I think this is a very big scandal, and it looks for me as if the government on purpose wants to do something and does not care for health. And if the government at the same time says this is all for your health because COVID-19 is such a dangerous disease, then the government is lying.
Right.
Then the government is betraying its own people. And if this would be the case, there would have to be punishment for the government. We could not tolerate this, to be betrayed by our own politicians, by our own government. And if those physicians and those directors of the institutes who control quality in medicine, if they say they don't have data, they were not asked. And it's not only one. Also, the director of the board of doctors, who is responsible for pharmaceutical quality, he said the same. And not only in Germany, also in neighboring countries. So we hope that our petition will confront the decision makers in Amsterdam, in the European Medical Agency, will confront them with these arguments that they cannot say, we did not know this.
Right.
They are aware of the critics now.
Let me
we
ask
send
you,
it to them.
Well, I want to get into another one of the issues. Now, I'm shocked because this is something that we've been looking at. To be clear, in virtually every animal trial of a coronavirus vaccine before we started rushing into human trials, we were seeing this antibody-dependent enhancement that in the worst case scenario could lead to death somewhere out there in the future when we come in contact with the coronavirus or some mutation of the coronavirus. It would seem you would need some fairly long-term trials to capture and understand whether you've overcome this issue. Yet Anthony Fauci in America is saying we're ready to go with this. Even doctors like Dr. Peter Hotez in America that worked on the coronavirus vaccines that warned the Congress that there was this potential for antibody-dependent enhancement that was very catastrophic in his own animal trials. He's apparently now telling all of America, go ahead and get any one of the three as soon as they're available. It's really quite shocking, the carelessness with which we seem to be moving forward. But, since we have, not a lot of time, and I want to get to something that I had not seen. You lay out several different issues, but something I had not heard was the issue of fertility. You bring up in your petition this issue around the placenta and fertility. Can you explain just a little bit, for those of us, is there actually a potential risk of fertility being affected by this vaccine?
I was alerted by a guy who was specialized in human genetics, and he gave some literature and he gave some alert that there is some parts of the human genome is coming from viruses. We get them from viruses, from retroviruses. We are shaped from our functions in our body are regulated by genes, and some of those genes, they come from viruses. And there is one gene which is part of our genome, which is regulating that the placenta is growing in the uterus. And this is cytosine. And this will come, and this protein, this is very, very similar to proteins that have been described in the spikes of the coronavirus.
Okay.
And the homology between those two proteins, this makes me question whether if we have antibody against the proteins of the coronavirus spikes, what we want to have with this vaccination, what they are aiming at, do those antibodies also neutralize The Zincysteine. Zincysteine is similar. The proteins are similar. And if you have antibodies, they recognize the proteins. And when they recognize only the spike protein, this will not happen. But when they also react with a very similar Zincysteine, then there will be infertility. This is the danger. And I want to know whether this was tested. They tried to find out whether this could happen, and they did not. It was not included. The women who are participating in these now, they are said to have anti-conception measures. Some say 28 days, and some say 3 months after the stop of the study. But you know, the long term, if you want to observe if there is infertility, you have to observe a little bit longer. Sometimes people want to get children, and it takes some months until they succeed. Right. So you don't know this, and it is not going to be observed. And I think this is a very big risk, and I want to know whether there are results in animal studies or not. And I think they even haven't tested this with animals. So wow. This is a danger. And we only ask, we don't say it is like that, but we want to know that it is not like that.
Correct. Just where there are possibilities in science, especially with an experimental product and a brand new technology, before we give it to millions of people, we should start crossing out potentials that scientists are pointing out with how this thing may backfire. And you list 4 major potentials, and many others in the petition, and others are speaking out. We can go through all those, but again, for anyone that really wants to drill down on this, Dr. Vodarg's entire petition and papers will be available if you're a part of our newsletter, so you can read through them on Monday. Here's the question I want to ask. There's multiple things you've discussed: ADE, antibody-dependent enhancement, this potential issue with the placenta and fertility in the future in women are all, should be being looked at, yet I think it's obvious that a 2-month trial, or the time period with which this phase 3 trial has been going on, is problematic in that, they're bragging that we're taking a process that usually takes 8 years to develop a vaccine, and we've done it in 6 months. But the truth is you've only developed a product. You haven't done the 7 and 8 years of safety trials and review, watching people live with this product in order to understand whether it's safe or not. I want to bring up something else, because earlier in the show we talked about the PCR testing and the fact that there's real issues now being called out by you and many other scientists that are saying this PCR test is so inaccurate that we have no way of trusting it. And yet it is the PCR test that's being used in the trials themselves to determine whether somebody has the illness. I mean, it's mind-boggling to me that something that is so completely inaccurate is being used at potentially the most important moment in humanity, both as a diagnostic tool that is driving us into lockdowns that are leading to all other sorts of complications in our lives, but in a trial that is bringing about a test product, an experimental product that could potentially end people's lives if it's not done correctly. Is there a better test they could be using, or a better way to test all of the elements other than PCR, which clearly can be 97% inaccurate? I mean, I live in the modern world. I have to believe we can do this better. Do you have a recommendation of how to do that better?
Yes, you could. First, you have to look at the clinical symptoms. This is very important. And if somebody gets an infection, typical corona symptoms, it even may be some other virus which makes the same symptoms. So you don't even know then, only looking at the symptoms. But if you have symptoms, you may distinguish whether they are very heavy or very, very serious or not. And then you also have to find out which virus it is. And for that, a very good quality of research has to be done. And we think in such a study we need sequencing which is much more thorough, which is looking at much more molecules and much safer in distinguishing the virus which is responsible for the infection. So the infection is something the body does, and you can see the clinical symptoms. You can say without any PCR or any other test, this is an infection because you have symptoms. But then you have to find out what is the reason for the symptoms? And then you need tests, and they have to have a high quality, and they have to have a good sequence in. The PCR doesn't say nothing about what is the reason for symptoms. It's not to be used. And this is why the whole clinical studies are unethically, because those people are exposed, and you could know before that there will be no result you can use for decisions afterwards. So it's a very, very sad development, and we want to stop immediately with our petition. We want to stop those tests.
And you, can you explain to me just really quickly, I'm sure it's fairly complex, but you're talking about something I believe called the Sanger sequence. Is this what you're recommending instead of PCR, a much more accurate, I mean, my understanding is a PCR could even see a piece of flu virus, make a mistake in how it, and say you're positive for coronavirus when actually it was a flu virus. It's that inaccurate. Tell me about the Sanger sequence. How would that sort of fix the problem?
I make it with an example. If you have a page with text, you see one big page with text, and you're looking for 4 letters or 5 letters in a defined role. You look for them. Then you can, and you want to say, I want to find the page which I'm looking for. Then maybe you hit some of the pages you're looking for, but when you have many false positive pages, and if you take several lines of the text, the more parts of the text you sequence and you look at, the more safe you are. You get the page you want. So it is about the quantity of analysis which are in the test, and about the method, which is a very safe and a very well to be controlled method that is used to sequence the single genetic informations.
Interesting. I mean, I think
to
understand you, it's interesting, but to people out there, I think what he's described is, imagine a crossword puzzle. If you're looking for a page and each page is potentially an illness, but all you're looking for is the word cat, there are many words on different pages that could have the word cat, and you would circle that and say, hey, I found the illness, it's coronavirus, it's positive, but in fact that word cat was on a page that was for the flu. What you want is more letters and more sequences of that page so that we reduce the ability to misdiagnose.
You know, and even there, it's more complicated. With a PCR, it is not standardized. You don't know the letters even. Some have written Latin letters, others have Greek letters, they're different letters of different alphabets and each laboratory takes its letters.
Why?
And so, it's not standardized, and nobody has control about all those laboratories. We asked the Robert Koch Institute to tell us the rate of positive tests of the 180 laboratories working with that. They did not know. This would be a hint, if you have a laboratory who has a percentage of positive rate of 50%, now have you one with only 1% positive rate, you may look for the reasons why it is like that, and you can find the mistakes and you can improve perhaps the method. But this does not happen. It seems that politicians and that the responsible people at the Robert Koch Institute are not interested in this. So the test which we use to define this so-called pandemic doesn't say anything. And I started in February warning. And I said, if we would not have this test, nobody would recognize there's something unusual going on this winter. It would have been just a flu like all flus.
All right. Well, it looks like we're having, I mean, you're broadcasting to us from another country, and, we're having some difficulties with that, but I've been able to hear you and understand you, and I appreciate it. So obviously, you are laying out some very, very disturbing issues. The fact that we have no way to know whether we've overcome some catastrophic potential future results with this vaccine, and the tests we're using are inadequate. I'm going to go, is it a financial decision? Why aren't they using Sanger sequencing? Why aren't they using a much more accurate? I mean, this is to me, it's an embarrassment on science that at such a critical time we're either cutting corners or using the wrong type of diagnostic tools. It defies reason at levels that I'm speechless. Do you have any last thoughts, as we try to move forward? What is it that people can do? What your fellow scientists and doctors, what do we need to do to make sure we don't make one of the greatest scientific errors in human history?
Protect yourself and protect all your neighbors and friends, not so that they don't get this vaccine. And you have to show up. You have to tell the politicians that you will blame them for what they do with this. I think what's happening, it's a great betrayal. We are betrayed, and people who betray, they normally are punished. And we won't forget this if they go on doing this with us. We are trying, as many scientists and as many doctors, to convince them not to participate in this. And if the doctors don't participate, and if the scientists show up, maybe that the politicians stop this nonsense, and then, okay, they can come and we talk with them, and we want to be sure that something like that never happens again. We have to live together. We have to go on living together. And those people who betray us, they will still be there afterwards. So we have to find a way to find the truth and not to hurt people with what we do.
Brilliant and very important. Your petition, I imagine, needs signatures specifically from, is it doctors or people in Europe? How do people join your petition to the health agencies in Europe to stop this potential future carnage that is, at the very least, possible, if not probable? Where do we go to be a part of your petition?
I think the petition will be considered. It has to be considered because there are many scientists too who signed it, and I think that there is this disturbing fact that after the Brexit, the UK left the European Union and can make its own decisions. So I hope that this is not a hole where the whole thing comes back then afterwards. So we have to watch out. And we have to ask our European politicians too, in European Parliament, to watch. And I think we have to wait, and we have to show that we observe the committee who is deciding. They are scientists, and they want that we believe their decisions. It's not only about this one vaccination, it's about all the drugs they decide on. And they are the same people. If they lie, if they betray us now, we won't believe them anymore.
Such an important point, Dr. Vodarg. I want to thank you for taking the time. I want to thank you for being brave enough to blow this whistle as loud as you are. It can't be convenient. I'm sure you're being called names by certain people that want to see this vaccine moving very quickly. There is such a great body, and you're joining us for the first time. So many great scientists, I think, that stand behind you now. When I think about the Great Barrington Declaration, nearly 50,000 scientists and doctors now saying we need to take a second look at how we're, talking about COVID-19, how we're testing for it, and whether or not we should be locking down. And you, of course, now I think really at the head, you and Dr. Yeadon, we cannot let these products be put into an unsuspecting population that believes that science has been done correctly when clearly it is not being done correctly. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for your mission. We're going to do everything we can to support it.
Thank you for the interview.
Absolutely. Take care. I don't know what to tell you, folks. This is not, your pharmacist down the street. These guys were health ministers. Vodarg has such a history of working in health and science, in virology and medicine. Dr. Yeadon, who was his partner on this, has worked for Pfizer developing vaccines and drugs. They know what they're talking about, and they are screaming and shouting, "Stop, the bridge is out. Stop the train. You could all die." I don't know how to put it lighter, yet everyone in our media that I can see in the United States of America, and I'm assuming all over Europe, all of you journalists and news agencies, I will hold you personally responsible for the carnage. And you, Dr. Paul Offit and Peter Hotez and Anthony Fauci, we will never let you live this down if innocent people die or become infertile or sterilized because you rushed a product that was not ready for the public. I want to sort of get in the weeds for a moment, and for those of you that are with us, this issue of fertility really struck me. And as I've said, we have international scientists, and we sort of went through it with Dr. Vodarg. But I went to my team and I said, I want to understand this. What are they talking about? Viral DNA and placenta. What is this? What does this really mean? And yesterday, one of the great resources we have out of Europe was taking me through it in an article that was actually written this year. It blew my mind, and I want to have we're going to work on a new segment called In the Weeds. Here we go. The first, segment of In the Weeds. I want to read you through this article because I think this is really fascinating and somewhat disturbing when you think about what Dr. Vodarg just said. This is an article by PBS, How the Placenta Evolved from an Ancient Virus. So the placenta has to be the most incredible gatekeeper. It has to let oxygen and nutrients get to the baby, and it has to let carbon dioxide and waste get out. For example, medicines can get through, protective antibodies can get through, but if the mother and baby ever actually touched, or if any blood got through, the mother's immune system would immediately kill the baby. The syncytiotrophoblasm is the outermost layer of the placenta, the part that is pressed against the uterus. It's literally a layer of cells that have fused together, forming a wall. This is where the magic happens, Kulin said. This wall of cells keeps mom and baby working in harmony and not killing each other. There's no other structure like this anywhere else in the body. According to Chung, the placenta we think of as a defining characteristic of live-bearing mammals, primates, rodents, dogs, cats, etc., is estimated to have evolved about 150 million to 200 million years ago. Before that, if you wanted to reproduce, you had to lay eggs. When evolutionary biologists like Chung mapped the genomes of these cells, they found that the protein that allowed these cells to fuse into a wall called syncytin didn't look like it came from human DNA. It looked more like HIV. According to Chung, this protein actually came from an ancient retrovirus, the most famous of which is HIV. Viruses are little strips of biologic information that can't do anything on their own. So they enter the cells and hijack the cell's machinery to make copies of themselves and replicate and move on to infect other cells. Retroviruses, on the other hand, take it to the next level because they are strips of DNA that enter cells and just go ahead and insert themselves into the host's own DNA. Now the host is stuck with viral DNA for the rest of its life, and it can never stop doing what the virus wants. Viruses such as HIV have been infecting vertebrates for probably a couple 100 million years, according to Chung. So according to evolutionary biologists, once upon a time, some retrovirus infected an egg-laying vertebrate. And by chance, that virus settled into the animal's egg cells. And it just so happened that that particular infected egg met a nice sperm and got fertilized. The baby that was hatched, whatever kind of proto-mammal it was, now had copies of that virus DNA in all its cells. This virus helped that mammalian ancestor survive better by giving it a better placenta. Then this piece of DNA would have been passed on to the next generation and eventually spread into the population, Chung said. And this process we think of as a molecular domestication of an ancient retrovirus element, and this retroviral element continues to be important for placental development in modern humans. Okay. You get it? Infected by a virus 100 million years ago, took us from being able to have eggs and have to put the embryo outside of the body, allowed us to keep the embryo inside the body. And what they are saying is the spike protein in the coronavirus that's being isolated and the RNA vaccines that we are now going to attempt to give to innocent people, maybe next week in America and certainly within days in the UK, that it's telling our cells to create this protein. the spike protein. The problem is this protein looks very, very similar to the viral protein that makes up this important wall in your placenta so that you can give birth. This isn't just this article. There's several articles that have pointed out this potentially problematic issue. This was in GP Life of Herbs and COVID-19 Questions for the Future. The remarkable homology, right, similarity recorded between SARS-CoV-2 spike protein and HERW-derived protein in syncytin. Again, another article. They're talking about these two elements are very, very similar, the endogenous retroviruses against the backdrop, and it says much of the same thing. Take a look at this. On top, what you're looking at is the Wuhan peptide. That's essentially what this DNA line looks like in the COVID-19 spike protein. And below what you're looking at is that peptide that is found in the placenta. Is not going to cause this problem, meaning we better have injected this and followed pregnancies of animals and then followed pregnancies of many humans. And remember, some of us may be vulnerable, some may not. What is going to happen to all the women that are in the trials right now? We do not know. What will happen to all the nurses and doctors that may or may not be coerced into getting this vaccine? We do not know, people. It is extremely, extremely dangerous science. This is the greatest experiment in humanity, and to watch people so carelessly on every network try to convince people they should do this. Imagine if every woman on the earth, the way Bill Gates dreams and Tony Fauci dreams, gets this vaccine. As I have said before, there is a potential, however small it may be, that we make a species that cannot ever procreate again. See, this is why they censor the high wire. We don't give you headlines delivered by Pfizer. We are talking to world-renowned scientists that are actually challenging how bad these studies are and how dangerous the potential outcomes are. But don't worry about it. Don't worry about Qantas. Don't worry about those hospitals. We are bringing you the truth. You are finding the high wire. They may try to censor us. They may lie about the potential safety or efficacy of their vaccine that can't even stop the infection. They may even manipulate their studies. But we are going to win this. Number one, because we have the truth. And number two, because they will never be able to stop this.
A sign over I-40 in Durham is catching a lot of attention.
If you were driving on I-95 this morning, you may have seen a banner on the Connor Street pedestrian bridge.
And many have expressed concerns over the fast-tracked COVID-19 vaccine. One group in Fargo took their concern to a place where many could see it.
The demonstration was led by the Florida Freedom Keepers and the grassroots organization V is for Vaccine, aiming to let people know the risks of vaccines.
Medical freedom activists have set up banners in all 50 states today that read, COVID-19 vaccine manufacturers are exempt from liability.
Today we're hanging a banner that says COVID-19 vaccines can cause injury and death in Bedford, New Hampshire.
Yeah, we put 4 signs up today, 3 in Columbus and 1 in the Dayton area. It's still early and we expect a lot of traffic.
We did a thing today. Say hello.
We're putting up a banner that says COVID vaccine manufacturers are exempt from liability. In Lawrence, Kansas.
In Fort Collins, Colorado.
In Spokane, Washington.
Today in North Georgia.
Auburn, California. Kansas City, Kansas.
Queens, New York.
In San Diego, California.
Las Vegas, Nevada.
Honolulu, Hawaii.
Why is it so important that people see these banners today? The thing is, people don't understand when the 1986 Act passed, that made all vaccine manufacturers, every company, every single one, they're completely exempt from liability.
It's so important that everybody at least knows the risk so that they can make an informed decision when that time comes to vaccinate.
There's no other drug that's FDA approved
that isn't liable. Like you can sue anybody for any other drug except for vaccine. So people should just know that.
What that means is if you're injured by taking the COVID vaccine, you are on your own.
My daughter had a severe reaction to a vaccine 6 years ago. So I want people to know that if you have a reaction to a vaccine, the government's not going to help you.
People of all sides care about this, and whether you have people on the left or right, they all care about this vaccine for some reason. To me, this is making history. To me, this is for my kids and all kids, hopefully protecting generations to come.
I couldn't be more proud. We've been watching these incredible rallies around the world in England and Germany and wondering, when is America going to wake up? When is America going to do something? And this event, which happened over the weekend, which swept the country, made news organizations across the country bringing truth to drivers all over. And my understanding, even in several other countries that were involved in this, the brains behind it, V is for vaccine. I'm joined right now by Olivia Mikos and Josh Coleman. First of all, thank you. Thank you. I mean, we can sit here and talk and sit on our couches, and I can deliver truth all day long. But if we don't get out in the streets and stand up and represent to the people and start waking people up en masse, then we can't complain about what ends up being our future. How did this event happen? What was the brains behind it? What made you think of doing it?
Well, it seems like a lot of the things that we've done have sort of come out of seeing a good opportunity. And so I saw that Sunday, November 29th was coming up, which is the biggest traffic day of the entire year. And we had just implemented putting out educational facts using the over the freeway overpass banners. And so with it being the big traffic day, I thought, this is the time to go out there and do it. And it all just sort of evolved. At first I thought, let's get 10, 15 states on board. And then after all these really easy phone calls, every single person I talked to, they understood it, they got it, they were excited to make it happen, to organize in their state, that I just said, you know what? Let's keep going. Let's try to get all 50 states. And then, of course, then expanding also to Australia, Canada, and the United Kingdom. And it all came together beautifully. And, I think we got a maximum impact going out on a day like that.
Olivia, what was your feeling as you started? I'm sure you're talking to all the different groups. They're probably calling in, had questions. Did you feel like it was a success? Was it what you had dreamed this could be?
Oh, it ended up being beyond what we expected. I mean, Josh has these ideas, and then I help implement these huge out-of-the-box ideas he has, and I just kind of get in there and start working with it. And then it's funny, once it comes to fruition, that's when you really experience the magnitude of it. And this just blew me away. It absolutely blew me away. I had chills doing it, and just watching that again, I had chills, tears came down my eyes again. It's just beyond just seeing the impact that it's having. It's amazing to see how empowering it is for everyone involved. And I think that's huge, because this goes beyond just getting the truth out there too. This is to me a spiritual battle. So there's something about empowering everybody to speak the truth and to contribute to make this world better.
I reflect back, Josh, you and I were on the Vax bus for many, many months together, traveling with that film, and you did such a brilliant job documenting all of the parent stories, a great contributor to the follow-up film, the People's Choice, or the People's Truth. And I think now looking, we all sort of went different directions. We found different places. Polly is doing her work. Andy Wakefield is off making his films. But and of course, the informed consent action work in the high wire. But Josh, I am so blown away at how this has come together, to watch you building this environment. It was something that, you found a place that nobody thought to go, right? I mean, you and I would go to these rallies, and it'd be a small group of people, and it was hard to sort of stay aligned. Everybody kept saying, we've got to come up with a common thought or a common theme. And instead of sort of having to stand there and say, hey, everybody, follow me, you gave this movement a look. You gave it multiple statements so that each person could choose their own statement, and not have to argue with each other. I want to talk about, liability. I want to talk about aborted fetal cell lines. You did something brilliant. You said, let's talk about it all, but let's stand together. When I think of people that say, I just don't know what to do, I don't know how to move forward, how do you move forward, Josh? How do you find your way to having created such an important part of this movement? What is the secret sauce?
Well, I think it came out of the shadow banning and the censorship. As after the Vax bus, I continued to make video content, and they were burying my content. I was spending all this time creating these videos, and they weren't being seen. They were being seen by people within the community, and I just wasn't getting it out there. And after experimenting with the large signs, going out on my own and having one sign at Comic-Con dressed as the plague doctor, and realizing that the tens of thousands of people that were walking around me, all of them are looking. Not one person could walk by without looking at the sign and reading it. So I thought, and this is one guy with one sign, and I'm reaching a large number of people. So it was really like, how do I put a template forward for other people to do this? This is simple, it's easy, it's cheap. Anybody can do these types of things. And then, of course, the messaging was a whole nother ball game there. And I think a lot of the arguing that goes on within our community is oftentimes based on the messaging, or how do we do this or that, and really I tried to boil down with Olivia the strongest messages, and the messages that are broad, that we see that on the other side. We see the pharmaceutical companies, they have 5 or 6 things that they've been saying over and over again for decades now. And everybody's memorized these things. And we, of course, have the most passionate activists in the world. But what we see is our activists are going out with 100 different things that they want to talk about, because they have so much knowledge, and they want to dump it all on everybody. But I think sometimes we forget, initially, we just want like some surface, very broad, very easy to assimilate information. And so that's what we did together, is worked a very long time on the messaging, and then coming up with what we thought were the strongest points that could easily be verified with government sources. We even have these flyers that go along with the signs. The flyer looks just like the sign on one side, and then you turn it around and you have a little bit of detail about that particular fact, and then a QR code that the person can scan with their phone that takes them directly to the government source to verify that piece of information. So, when we're out demonstrating and someone says, that's BS, or I don't believe it, it's take out your phone, here you go. And within seconds, they are finding out that is in fact true. So really, I think we've just boiled it down and tried to simplify it and made it something easy that anybody can do.
Amazing, Josh. Olivia, for people that want to get involved, and get out on the street, which is, we are not going to do this sitting on our couches. How do we find you? How do we find out about the next V is for Vaccine event? How do we get involved?
Well, they can come to visforvaccine.com. We're also on Instagram and Facebook at visforvaccine. But what we are strongly trying to encourage people to do is to not wait for us to, start a demonstration or to get people out, but to do it on their own. So when they go to our website, they will find basically they can download all of the graphics for the signs. We have resources for them to go purchase the banners themselves, or just purchase already pre-made signs as well. And we also have tutorials on there how to put the signs together, etc. And so, no need to wait for anybody else. We want to empower everybody. Everybody should get out and do this. So, if you have the drive to do it, go to visforvaccine.com, go download the graphics, go print up some signs, go find a place where there's a ton of people, and just get out there and do it. Get out there and educate. And the other thing too that's wonderful, about our template is that along with the flyers Josh just showed you, anybody can do it. There's people who, have difficulty engaging with others and talking about the subject, or being able to back up the fact that they have on the sign. So if they're not one to sit there and go back and forth with somebody, you know, all they need to do is hand this to them so they can go out there and be an activist, spread the truth without, you know, having to, you know, put themselves completely out there. So it's, you know, it's for everyone. And the other thing too is, you know, if really this isn't for you and you don't want to get out of your house, or it's difficult for you to get out of your house, we do, you know, aside from doing that, we actually encourage people to donate to us because that helps us facilitate events like we did last weekend. We helped supplement a bunch of states with their banners and whatnot. So yeah, there's a lot of ways to get involved. So either donate or make one
Amazing.
yourself.
Fantastic, you guys. They never saw this coming, and you know, I was in on a podcast the other day with David Martin, who said we've got to get analog. We cannot just be stuck on the internet. We've got to get out on the ground. And I think, you know, it's really simplified messages. And people come to me, Del, we got to get unified in our messages. I want to say, go to V is for Vaccine. Go help those guys out. The messages are already there. It's so easy to do. Work with each other. Josh, Olivia, this is an amazing thing that you put together this weekend. We are seeing many of the events that you've been involved with before. We'll continue to follow that. Keep us updated on what's happening next. You are truly making a difference, and I want to thank you and congratulate you on being heroes in this movement at a time where so many are afraid. But know that you stand for so many families, so many children, and as we now know, so many scientists and doctors around the world that need us all to stand together right now so that we can win this. Josh, what are your final thoughts? What do you want to say to people out there? There's a lot of stress. People are freaking out. They feel like they don't have the power to overcome what's happening. What would you like to say to those people?
I would say I know how you feel. You know, in March, when the lockdown started happening, I was about to wrap it up. I thought, holy cow, you know, this is unbelievable. And it's not just our country, it's all the countries. And this amount of pressure and this amount of propaganda that's going out, it can be discouraging. But you should be encouraged, because what's going on right now is we are seeing people wake up like they've never woken up before. And before the pandemic, or whatever you want to call it, I think the people that were mostly interested in learning more about vaccines were people that were having a baby most often. Those were the people that were actually interested in having the conversation, taking time out of their day and learning more about it. But now that everybody knows that the only way everything's going to go back to normal is that they get this COVID-19 vaccine, they're actually now interested in learning more about COVID-19 vaccine or other vaccines in general. So we have their ear for the first time. Everybody, they are going to listen to what you say, and they're going to talk about what you say. You know, so it's actually a very exciting time for us. And meanwhile, we're seeing people lose faith in doctors and scientists. They're realizing that not all doctors are created equal, and so we need to really take advantage of that. And that's why we just need to get out there and talk to people and let them know the truth about what's going on.
Man, it's amazing. Such great words. The two of you and everybody that was involved in these events over the weekend and the ones in the future, it really makes me think of one of my favorite quotes. It's this quote right here. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. Margaret Mead. Josh, Olivia, thank you for leading us and showing us how we can make a difference. I'll see you at the finish line. Let's get this thing, all right? Take care.
Right on.
Well, another amazing episode of The High Wire. A couple glitches. We will work that out, but we care about the truth. You're here because you actually care about the truth. Please share The High Wire with everyone you know. This is how we change it. This is how we grow. This is how we help science. We've got to save science. I don't care how many people want to say we're anti-vaccine or blah, 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 blah. The truth is we are the ones spreading the truth, and mainstream media is spreading the misinformation. And if you don't believe me, then why don't we check back with the event that took place with the WHO in Geneva, Switzerland, just last December, coming together to discuss the vaccine hesitancy community. How do we stop them? How do we force vaccines and get everyone to take it? When they talk about the misinformation that the anti-vaxxers are spreading, I really love this moment by Heidi Larson, one of the lead psychologists of the WHO. I think she puts it perfectly about our misinformation. Listen to what she had to say.
I spend a lot of time talking, particularly in the last 6 months, with tech companies, Facebook, WhatsApp, Pulsar, Twitter, Instagram, WeChat, Weibo. They have a lot of fingers pointing at them to fix the misinformation problem. But it's not so simple. One, the biggest problem is a lot of it's not misinformation. Our problem is, as we've heard in the last 48 hours, that there's not anything 100%. And what actually can legally, without creating a censorship thing, can we absolutely say this is misinformation? Because we have a lot of ambiguity in the safety field, and we have to come to terms with that. So we have to think about it differently than deleting misinformation, but building trust so people are willing to put up with a certain amount of risk because they believe in it enough. They believe in our work, what we're doing, and that it's in their interest.
That's right, Heidi. It's not misinformation, and we are not the one causing the problems. You at the WHO have led us on one of the greatest scientific disasters in the history of mankind. Just know we will never let you live it down. But let's not wait for that I told you so, everybody. That moment will come. Right now, we win this. How are we going to win this? Because we have the truth. We have the brains, we have the ability to get out and make a difference. Every single one of your friends and family members is now questioning this vaccine that's in all of the news. This is our moment, and think about it. Even though this emergency use authorization may come, it looks like it is already in the UK, and most probably with the excitement in the White House and Tony Fauci and everybody that just can't wait to get the military out and line up whoever will take it. Just know that they may be making the greatest mistake in scientific history. I feel bad for those misinformed people that watch CNN, MSNBC, and Fox that believe that this is a safe product and that they should go out in order to protect themselves. As I've shown you, it cannot even stop the symptoms better than not getting it at all, and it definitely cannot stop infection as far as we can tell, so it cannot end this pandemic. It appears that all this vaccine has the potential to do is to potentially cause a long-term autoimmune disease. It could potentially kill you, and it could potentially make you sterilized the rest of your life. And we won't know if we've overcome those potentials until we have done the long-term safety studies that virtually every drug we've ever made has gone through. So for those people with brains, with those people still thinking, don't worry. No one's going to force this on you. And if they do, if your employer says you have got to take this in order to have this job, I ask you, if someone said back in Nazi Germany, get on this train, are you going to get on it? Even if they tell you it's going for a holiday? Stand up for yourself. Speak for yourself. Speak out. You know the truth, and you're getting the truth here, and share this truth with everyone you know. Who told you the revolution would not be televised? It's being televised here on the High Wire. We're shouting it from the mountaintops across every agency and every social media platform that will have us, and on our own website, thehighwire.com, where you will find us and you will stand with us as we take this win, the truth, and all the scientists that now stand with us to the end of the High Wire. I'll see you at the finish line. And before that, I'll see you next week. Thanks for watching, and thanks to the High Wire insiders who make this show possible. If you'd like to become a Highwire insider, then go to our website, thehighwire.com, and sign up now. And please share the show. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, BitChute, and now on Roku. Because knowledge is power, censorship is real, and we need all the help we can get.